taking it. All right, click.
Yeah.
And
I love how Ben just like
we're
has no
live.
problem. Like, okay.
Ben has no problem. What?
It is Wednesday, January 27th, 5:04 p.m.
January?
Eastern. Oh my God! It is Wednesday, October 27th. Wow, what is wrong with me? 5:04
It feels
p.m.
like January outside. It's gray.
It's very gray. I am like kind of sitting in the dark. Besides for like my light and my thing, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Thanks for the cover, Scott. I was just I was trying to get at what I was going to say about Ben, but we're live now. So go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, it is 5:04 p.m. Marsha Blackburn attacked Susan Hennessy today in a hearing, asking Merrick Garland whether he was going to protect the Durham investigation from her. Somebody needs to inform Senator Blackburn that the National Security Division, where Susan works, has no interactions with the Durham investigation.
Why did
new wolf shirt has arrived?
It's so much less nipply.
It is less nipply.
It's unbelievably less nipply.
Yes.
It's got it's almost like it puts
unless there's
ears
something really
on
weird going on with your nipples, it's less nipply. Yeah.
All right.
I would just say I just say that nipples are less nipply than that other shirt.
That's a good line. I think maybe we're going to quote.
I think Virginia Heffernan would agree with that line
Yeah.
very strongly.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore, and our guest has been slightly delayed, but will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, Scott is going to tell the story of his terrible nose injury.
Oh.
He can tell the true version, a false version.
Oh no! Oh no! This is not. Version. Okay. But I could have done Where's the Lie on this.
Had you given him more than 3 seconds notice?
You're right. Yeah, I could. Okay.
By the way, we have scheduled Shane Harris to play Where's the Lie.
Oh, good.
Which is an exciting development.
Yeah.
I know that's not nearly.
Oh, you are now prepared to do a Where's the Lie?
Yes, I am.
Which day next week are you doing it?
I don't know. I mean, I can't do Mondays or Tuesdays, but Wednesdays work for me.
Well, let's do next Wednesday.
Okay. Actually, It's a fact I can't.
Wait, was that part of Where's the Lie? Are you like teasing us?
Yeah, the lie is Scott will never actually schedule it.
Is that like? Oh,
that really would have been meta.
Yeah.
That would have got like so high concept. Okay, no, but I do have one, and I will tell you, and I will schedule it.
We're going to actually poll the audience on whether you're lying right now. The poll is up, folks. So, Scott, where have you been? We haven't seen you. You never call. You never write.
So it turns out that I didn't realize this, but I do have a job. The last year and a half really kind of obscured whether I was employed or not. But it turns out that I am employed. That's number one. And number two is that 5 p.m. turns out to be like business hours. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can't be like, I'm sorry, I can't meet with you to talk about your paper. I have to hang out with my friends on Crowdcast. No, this doesn't.
Maybe we should.
I'm sorry, you can't get tenure yet. We have to.
Maybe we should have Scott, in lieu of fun, Scott's office hours edition, where we just you have office hours with students and we joke.
Right. Come on in. Let's talk about your paper. Okay.
Ben and I, in 85, 107, we were
Yeah,
closest
I
friends.
know.
We're just sitting there like,
Yes.
Greek chorus can make fun of your
Don't worry.
students.
Don't worry. We posted a link to your draft in the chat.
it says
That's
do
totally
not
cool.
distribute at the top. That's like totally
Right. Do not quote or distribute. Okay. But really keep
Well, we
this
didn't
within
quote.
the whole. Yeah, keep this in within the Crowdcast YouTube family. Okay.
I just want to point out that there is a pretty even split about whether you are lying about doing in Where's the Lie.
I do, like, if there was going to be like a long con of Where's the Lie, it would be Scott who did it. Like, I feel like that would be I would be on brand, heavily on brand.
I have a Where's the Lie.
Okay. What? Okay. Wait, were you laughing because you're lying?
See, that's the thing. I laughed because I thought, how ambiguous that statement was.
Fair.
For those who are asking about Professor Belew, she will be with us. She texted me and said she was going to be about 10 minutes late, having been... oh, there she is, in fact. So let's bring her on screen, and then we can dispense with this witty banter and engage in
I was also just going to
stuff.
say that, like, I really, like, I had this talk with Genevieve yesterday, but we decided to, like, wait until you, Ben, like, you guys, we could all talk about it together, which maybe if we ever have, like, collective family cheese night again, will happen. But hi!
Hello, Kathleen.
You have a new plant.
Yeah, I have a Target special over here. Don't tell room reader. It's faux.
It's fake?
God. That's
awesome.
The first thing I'm going to tell roommate. Are you kidding me? Like, now I don't, like, I'm going to scoop this, like.
And is the cactus fake?
Yeah, everything out here is faux. I'm sorry. This room is uninsulated, so in Chicago, the winter is not kind to this room.
I want to know why it is that you like. I like that you say faux instead of fake because it just makes you, one, sound fancier, and then two, like, I can't tell if you're talking about like the plants are trying to kill you because they're your enemy.
Oh,
so,
yes.
Like, or Vietnamese
like, are they
soup.
faux? Like, they're faux. They're against me. Like,
this is a whole situation.
I understand. I was thinking that you were saying that your faux plants were insulating you from the cold.
No.
But you were saying, right, I was mixing cause and effect.
I had
all... That is so cold, you can only have faux plants.
Yes, they were all real out here, and then last winter they were all crying out for help and to be moved inside. Yeah.
We have a poll up about what Kathleen means by her plants being faux. And you all can vote as you see fit.
I'm gonna have to.
That's very funny. Right? Yeah, you can mean just her room office is filled with Vietnamese soup.
Yes.
That would be fun.
Or enemies. All right, Kathleen. Since we last talked, you seem to have produced a new book.
Yes. It is a edited collection. I wish I could hold it up for you, but I actually don't have my physical copy yet, which is very frustrating. I would like to hold it and
you
touch
could
it.
You could just get a printout and then stick it on another book, and then it would be a faux copy.
Oh, very good, Kate Plonick.
So,
and as usual,
I love that.
I love that. So, it is called A Field Guide to White Supremacy. It's an edited collection that I worked on with my colleague and friend Ramon Gutierrez. And it's sort of a compendium of a whole bunch of essays written by people who are at the forefront of their fields, dealing with some element of white supremacy and the many problems it causes. So my contribution is about the white power movement, but there are pieces on anti-immigration, long histories of legal exclusion of different kinds of ethnic groups. There are pieces on anti-Asian violence, anti-Semitism. There are pieces on anti-trans and gendered violence and how it works to uphold systems of patriarchal white supremacy. And it starts with a big section. What I can hold up is it starts up with a big set of recommendations for the Associated Press manual, which is this thing, which is in every newsroom guiding how we tell stories about all of these things. And at some point in publicity from my first book, I picked it up and noticed that it has big, long sections on Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and even a long section on the Irish Republican Army, which I think we have not been talking about regularly for a while, or at least not in the news that I consume. And nothing really on the Klan, on neo-Nazis, on skinheads, on militias, and hardly anything. And what they had was not quite right on the alt-right, which is not really how we should be thinking about this anyway. So we started with some recommendations for the style guide and then went from there to the essays.
So what makes it a field guide?
So field guide, we mean to identify and get specialized knowledge about how one broad category of something is working. So I think part of what we're trying to do for mainstream readers is help people understand how parts of white supremacist systems are still producing racial inequality, even if nobody in that room is individually racist. So we might think, for instance, I'm using the metaphor of a wooden fence. So the fence was built by people who would identify as white supremacist in their historical context. And one plank of the fence is my first book, Bring the War Home, which is about racial violence. But other planks in this fence are things like racially differential outcomes in maternal health and the way we incarcerate far more people of color than white people, the way our legal system works around race, the way that our education system or property ownership or wealth acquisition, all of these things have disparate outcomes. And a lot of the time, it's not because of individual racist belief, it's because of long histories and built-in systems. So the guide is about identifying how all of these things work together.
So one other question for me, and then when you say white supremacy, are you using it as a synonym for racism? And so in your vocabulary and terminology, how should we understand the different, like what is the taxonomy, white supremacy, racism, structural racism, any of the following as ideology versus as outcome descriptor?
Anti-racism.
So I think white supremacy in this book, we are using to refer to both individual and structural racism. The whole system is white supremacy. And then inside of that, there are buckets for structural racism, individual racism. And then inside individual racism is overt racist belief that is interested in violent action. And that's where most of my work is located.
Yeah, but so anti-trans violence doesn't seem like it. So doesn't seem like white supremacy.
Yeah. So what we're looking at in the section on gender violence, which includes writings by Roderick Ferguson on the Pulse nightclub shooting, a piece by Rebecca Solnit on violence against women, and a piece by Corey Saffin on anti-trans violence. What we're looking at is the way that gender relationships and the positionality of women has worked to uphold this whole system. So there we're following exciting history from people like Stephanie Jones Rogers, who have found that white women have played a really important role in not only upholding the ideology of white supremacy, but in its violent enforcement in day-to-day life. So we're looking at those intersections. And part of the reason that that's in there is that this whole book came together because in the academy, we rarely talk to each other about these issues as sort of defined through the study of racial violence. So people in law schools who look at exclusion are hardly in conversation as much as we might be with people in history departments who work on, say, anti-immigrant violence today or things. The dog is not excited about this conversation.
You can have a dog in. We love dogs.
we're very dog friendly, real dog friendly, and faux dog friendly. But I can imagine several different relationships between white supremacy and, let's say, anti-Semitism. One could be that how can you talk about like such bad things in the world when there's such good things in the world?
That's how.
Yeah. I feel like I'm talking about anti-Semitism and white supremacy, and then like pan to like the sweetest face in the world.
Yeah, no, sorry. Well, because I need the sweet face to make it all possible. I'm sorry. So what was your question? I could lose totally track of your question.
No, so you can imagine like grouping anti-Semitism with white supremacy, because you can see that one reason why you might be an anti-Semite is that you believe that white Christian, Nordic, whatever, are superior or had a greater claim. But you also might think that actually one may not generate the other, but they're mutually constituting. Mm-hmm. That is the kind of anti-Semitism is a kind of force which also supports kind of white supremacy and vice versa. So would that be fair?
Yeah. And I think the connection there with gender is that, you know, if we follow this all the way to the extremist space in the white power movement, women's normal or normative gender roles for women is kind of one of the main organizing instruments. And women's martyrdom, as we're seeing again with the Ashley Babbitt story coming out of January 6th, is one of the main sort of calls to action. So women's reproduction is really important to all of these ideologies in different ways as well.
Can I ask? So Will Codrington was on last week, I think. Yeah, last week, talking about his new book, The People's Constitution, that kind of talks about, a bunch of stuff about voting rights and things like that. But one of the things that we kind of got wrapped up in was like social movements, and how in the early 1900s, like a lot of social movements moved from Black men voting to bootstrap women voting to bootstrap like lesbian rights and like other types of rights, right? Like that is like the hierarchy happens again in the 60s with like the civil rights movement, and then like and other things. And like one of the things that I'm kind of hearing what you're saying, if this is correct about the kind of the trans rights, is that like is that like one of the things that I remember most about second wave feminism was its dismissal entirely of like queer culture and like the purple menace and like everything around that. And so like, is there an idea that like they derive their power from these types of like from their preciousness as white women? Like they're kind of I forget actually what's the woman in To Kill a Mockingbird who
maybe, or no, the other lady,
like something like it starts with an E.
Cunningham.
No, that's definitely not.
I just remember her last name is Cunningham.
No,
I don't remember her
To Kill a
first
Mockingbird.
name. But yeah, aren't all the bad guys in To Kill a Mockingbird? It's like a giant clan of people.
I'm waiting for the comment section to answer.
Yeah, I am too. This is what I depend on them on, because apparently I don't have like a memory for anything anymore. But no, her first name sort of like Yule. Her last name was Yule. That's what it was.
Sorry, Yule.
Yeah, not. How the hell do you say like? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I said Cunningham, but I meant Yule. Like what?
You know, it's been like 30 years since I've read it.
Like, how are those even like marginally the same in any universe? I'm gonna let that go. Anyway,
there's a family of Cunninghams somewhere in that novel.
No, there isn't. Like they're definitely.
Yeah, there is. One of them was on the jury.
Oh my. Okay.
Violet Ewell.
Violet Ewell. Yes. But anyways, this is kind of the idea, is that like there is this preciousness and this kind of like this political power that coalesces around like a wronged white woman, and then it is built on basically this idea of kind of an underlying idea of white supremacy that like provides justification for, and like that person, as was the case with what's her face, Beth Ewell. Sorry. But the whole point of this is that, like, if you remember this story, she had actually seduced this black man and like gotten him to like, and then had been so embarrassed when he rebuffed her that she accused him of this rape and that he was put on trial for all of this. And that was like this entire craziness. But like the whole point was that she actually wasn't necessarily white supremacist herself, like in her individual actions. It was that like her creation of this moment like whipped like white supremacy into order to like target this individual. And that's kind of, I guess, like what I'm thinking about. Sorry.
Yes. Taking the dog outside. I will be right back.
No, I'm like being super articulate today, drawing on my vast literary
I just want to say that there are, as the chat is now reflecting, there is in fact a family of Cunninghams in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Tom Robinson.
And so I am not like, I had the wrong name, but it was not a complete fantasy.
All I remember is Schifferobe. I don't know why I can remember Schifferobe and not like anyway. Any of the other names, but anyways, go ahead, Scott.
I just will say I've never read or seen the movie.
Really?
Yep. I am.
It's actually. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to get off track because we're talking about the book, but that's like crazy.
So,
yeah.
I have a question about, I want to ask about the intersectional quality of the book. So, I totally accept that there is, that with respect to all kinds of other systems of power, gender identity, anti-Semitism, etc., there is a very close relationship with white supremacy. But it seems to me they exist also on separate axes, which is to say non-white supremacist groups are perfectly capable of being, violently sexist.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I guess my question is, what is the claim that the relationship is? Is it? It's presumably not that it's simply a derivative relationship of white supremacy. What's the nature of the claim?
Well, so I think that, and I want to not overstate here, because the claim in titling and the claim in bringing these things together is also a way of just sort of, working backward from the problem of racial inequality and racist violence to where is the scholarship that can help us understand those things. We went through other possible titles, like Field Guide to the History of Hate was one of the possible titles. But then it's not all hate, right? A lot of it is sort of carried out for a whole bunch of other reasons. So I think the relationship is, intersectional. It's about how different kinds of inequality shore up each other. And I think in terms of thinking about the relation to gender, it's about how primal, or how primary maybe both also primal, but how central the problem of white reproduction has come to be, not only to the fringe, but also to the mainstream. So I think some of the discomfort people were expressing after the last round of census results is a good example of this. And people on the left usually think of these as soft demographic transformations. When you think about like America's becoming more multiracial, the percentage of non-Hispanic whites is down, things like that. People in the white power movement hear that as apocalyptic emergency. And I think even people in the mainstream right are beginning to hear that as like a call to intensify things like voter disenfranchisement, anti-immigration pushes, et cetera. That's all about reproduction. So that's all about, at the end of the day, white women and the behavior of white women.
It's so interesting you mentioned this. I've just been reading a lot about, for reasons related to this podcast I've been doing on the French Village. I've been reading a lot about France in the 30s and the obsession with what they called French, but by which they meant white French, because it sure didn't include Senegalese, replacement, and just how wrapped up it was with nationalism. And they'd lost X number of million people in World War I, but they were pathologically obsessed with reproduction in a way that has a lot of resonance with what you're saying now.
Yeah, and I think it's we know from the history of how white supremacy has worked in the United States that the link with regulating sexual behavior and white supremacy has really been about regulating women, because, for instance, in slavery or in many other systems, a man's breaking of the color line could be profitable. It could be part of systemic terror against communities. There were very few consequences in many cases. But for white women to break that line was tantamount to racial annihilation. And so we know that is
sexual.
Sort of
it's always sexual.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think that, go ahead. I don't have anything else. I was just building. Go ahead, Scott.
You said something that sounds so interesting before, and I was hoping you could talk a bit more about it, which was that you didn't want to call a field guide to hate. That is, you wanted to and so can you talk about that, because there's something that really resonated, that really feels like you're picking up on something important. I was hoping you could talk about it.
Well, I think a lot of these systems are in place in our society in ways that we don't even realize. So I like this fence metaphor. Forgive me for using a metaphor over and over again, but because
just as long as you mix them.
We hate consistent metaphors here.
Yeah.
Stir the fence with a spoon.
Okay, yeah, I could paint it with something maybe. So if you go back to the fence is there impeding something, and it's not enough to just not be racist. It's not enough to just walk away from the fence, right? The fence is still standing up. So I think part of what we're trying to get at is that this is not just about any one of these things, but this is about the aggregation of inequality.
I see. So it's not like so this is not just about, first of all, individuals and their mental states on the one hand, but it's also not about hot, like, emotions like hate. It's about structural barriers.
I mean, some of it is about hot emotions like hate. Like my essay is about that, because that's where my research is. But I think like it's trying to start thinking about how do we bridge our opposition with something very overt and clearly bad, like the white power movement, and our opposition of other more subtle forms of white supremacy that are also harming people.
So I have a question for your field guide then.
Yes.
So let's put it to the test with something in the wild. A friend of mine who is Black, her parents are both from Ghana, and she has been wildly successful and works at a major company, and she and her husband are both of color, and they have young kids and they live in Manhattan, and they are basically trying to get their kid into Dalton. I'll just name the school because
trying to get their kid into where?
Dalton, the elite kind of private school in New York. And their kid is 5. I don't know what age it is that you have to start doing this stuff, but something like that. But there's a test. There's a bunch of questions in an interview to with the parents. And part of the test was showing them 2 pieces of artwork in the Western canon of art that was purely Western, by white artists, they had to identify the art, identify the artist, and say why it was important.
What?
Yes. Scott's Scott is sounds just like Dalton.
I was just gonna say, I have.
That sounds totally reasonable to me. A 5-year-old without the reasonable ability to identify Dutch masters shouldn't be admitted to school. What's the problem?
The parents have to do it. The parents have to password his.
No, I think that's the decline of standards, Kate. They should have the 5-year-old identify them.
You totally triggered me, because when you said that, all of a sudden I just went through all the just horrible things like that with my kids.
Yes.
And by the way, we failed every one of them, just always.
I also just want to say that I have I'm never going to identify the people that I'm talking about, and I've blurred them up a whole bunch for this, but I will always call out Dalton for this, screw them for this test. And I literally said, I said to her, I'm like, that isn't racist. That is white supremacist.
Yeah.
And I was like, that seems to me the definition of kind of structural white supremacy. In this very in this type of way that we don't typically talk about it. It's not someone in a hood, obviously, or not someone espousing oh, you have to have blonde hair and blue eyes. But it is our culture is the superior culture in which you have to have become imbued with knowledge in order to pass this test.
And it's also holding up a sort of and we see that move in a lot of places where it is more overt, right? And I'm not painting these two things with the same brush, but I am going to just notice that the Proud Boys will say that they're not white supremacists. They're just Western chauvinists. They just want to defend the fact that Western culture is superior, and that they think Western culture has something to offer that no one else in the world ever could, and that's what they believe, right? So that's the mainstream, more acceptable version that they have been trying out in order to not get labeled as
I'm not an outlaw, I'm a cowboy, or I'm not an outlaw, I'm John Wayne. What is this rebranding?
But this is not new either. I mean, David Duke used to say, I'm not racist, I'm racialist, I'm not segregationist, I'm just separatist, right? So the language around this switches as fast as people realize sort of what it is, and they're always calibrating about how far you can push. But back to the Dalton example, I think that that's just one really good example of how testing is often a site of inherent bias, right? This is true in SAT testing too, and this is true in there was just something on NPR last week in Chicago about how the biggest educational slips have been in communities of color during the COVID epidemic, and the biggest group to gain from going test optional, surprise, surprise, turns out not to be communities of color, but white kids who have tons of extracurricular activities. Because even if you take out the SAT, the whole admissions process to colleges has to do with all of these other markers that have to do with affluence and privilege and where you go to school, right? So this is what I mean. It's all, it's ingrained very, very deeply. So the field guide is not claiming to be exhaustive, but we're just trying to collate a bunch of interesting, good scholarly thinking about these issues. And then from the footnotes of the pieces, from Googling the people in the book, people can sort of use this as a jumping off point to learn more.
So I want to ask you about that point that you just made. I had just completely lost my train of thought.
And did you start your sentence and hope that by the time you got to the end of that clause, you would have sprung to mind again?
No. I started my sentence knowing where it was going, lost the thread about a few words into the sentence, and then was hoping it would come back to me by the time I finished the sentence, and it just didn't. So I'm totally copping to this right now. And
now to go let the dog in again.
Yeah, sorry.
You just have to come in and out and in and out. They're so demanding.
Wait, is that I feel like everything's splitting apart. The center cannot hold.
Yeah, mere anarchy is loosed upon the Lieu of fun. Richard Wattenbarger, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll take the floor.
Oh my God, guys,
it wasn't my dog.
Okay.
It wasn't my dog for once. So my question is, how much recognition are you and the other contributors to your book giving to the situation that meanings of the phrase white supremacy in the way that you're using it were not really current among a wider public until probably around the 2016 election. And I think a lot of people hear the phrase, outside of academe, hear the phrase and they think white supremacy, that's the guy across the town who puts on a white hood and burns crosses. And so my question is, what thoughts do you have about surmounting this terminological problem? And I'll just add that I am all in favor of this more expansive use of the phrase.
Sure. So I mean, I think that so I think we're just coming from the place of how people in the academy tend to use that phrase as their jumping off point. It's imperfect, I grant you. I think that, you know, I don't know. I've been on this show before talking about language and my frustrations with different terminology around white nationalism, around the white power movement. And I'm always just looking for precision, I suppose. But I think calling it white supremacy is important because I think it designates all of it as a problem that we need to face. Instead of something, I don't know, perhaps it should be called the Field Guide to Inequality. But also this is a collective work. So the title is, of course, a collective decision as well. So, yeah.
I
like white. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I like the title quite a bit. And I actually think that white nationalism, to my mind, is more about more like geographically bound around like patriotism and a government angle, whereas like white supremacy is more encompassing and also gets at like ideas of privileging like certain types of structure, as we just talked about, on top of like kind of more like in more like more subtle action, like that kind of like embedded architecture choices to like all the way up to like marches.
Yeah, like, I think that's right.
Yeah, so I think it's great.
That's what we were trying to do, so I think that's right then.
Yeah.
Well, David Botts is flitting around like the social butterfly that he is. And unlike the rest of you members of the Greek chorus, he's found ways of manipulating his own presence on the screen. So all this stuff that's been going on, I've had nothing to do with any of it.
Really?
Meanwhile, no, I'm not doing this. Look, my hands are up here. And David is just making himself appear and disappear and be audible and not. And see, like, I don't have anything to do with this. David, the floor is yours.
It's very tricky.
You hear me?
Yeah, nice to see you, David.
Oh, there I am. Really sorry about that. My computer is fighting me today. Professor Belew, thank you so much for coming. I look forward to getting your book nearly as much as you do. But can you talk a little bit about the trope of defending the virtue of a white woman and your thoughts? We know how that looked in the past. See also Emmett Till, but what does that look like today? I mean, what is a today example of that situation?
Sure. Well, I mean, Ashley Babbitt is a huge one. So Ashley Babbitt is the January 6th protester who was killed when she was trying to enter a inner chamber in the Capitol building, and someone shot her through the plate glass window. And immediately white power groups and militia groups tried to make a big martyrdom campaign around Ashley Babbitt. And we're just seeing it pick up now in more mainstream channels. But I mean, there was a great op-ed in the New York Times right after January 6th about this by Sayward Darby, who's studied white power women in the current movement. And it's one of the sort of tried and true ways that they've been able to fan recruitment. Vicki Weaver is another recent example, who was killed in the Ruby Ridge standoff in 1992. And these things come up every once in a while. I mean, like, I even remember thinking about this during the Trayvon Martin case, where the testimony that was supposed to show that he was dangerous or lurking was from a white woman taking the stand and talking about her young children, her role as a mother, her feelings of being endangered in her neighborhood. So those kinds of things, those are narrative tropes that attach to long histories of description and that activate, I think in many cases, even subconsciously for people around these stories.
So can I ask a question like around this, like kind of that you're like making me think about this? Like,
yeah,
Ben mentioned the Gabby Petito story and kind of the over rotation of the media around like that, like obviously domestic violence kind of I don't know what else it is, but like let's just call it domestic violence kind of tragedy, and like all of the attention this missing woman and then dead woman got because she was an attractive white woman. And it was kind of a salacious story for other reasons. But like, what always strikes me about this, in addition to like the inequality and like race, right, is that there is always this moment of like, we give zero shits about domestic violence and sexual violence in like 99 out of 100 cases. We don't properly fund shelters. We don't believe women when they tell us they're being beaten. We blame them for it. And then we have these moments where we have this person and like all of a sudden there is this kind of like collective amnesia around like anything that's happened. And so not to like, I don't want to make this, I think that this is two things. One, it erases people of color who have been going through the exact same thing, but it also erases people of the exact same color and the exact same situation in a lot of ways that have been going through the same things, and no one gives a shit about them until like it's a weird van story. Like in a national park or something. And like, I just don't actually understand that. I mean, I feel like our entire history, it's all over the place, but I don't get why women have all of this power to testify in the stand against someone and no power to change their situations vis-a-vis government or like social intervention.
So I'm interested to hear what you think about this Rebecca Solnit piece that's in this volume, which is, I'm trying to remember which title we went with. One of the working titles was The Longest War. And the argument is that the longest war in human history is the war against women, mostly perpetrated by their intimate partners. And the numbers are just, the numbers are horrifying and staggering. And it comes up every once in a while and we never really do anything about it. And one of the interesting things about it for me is I've been teaching that essay in class as part of the University of Chicago's core. Got Rebecca Solnit into the University of Chicago core curriculum. Public enemy, I will say, and the Zapatistas and Ani DeFranco. So one of the interesting things about teaching this essay is that it was written after Yes All Women. Do people remember Yes All Women hashtag? Kate will, but I think most people probably won't. This was after the shooting of college students by an incel in, where was that? University of Santa Barbara, I think.
It was wasn't it the San Bernardino shooting?
No. It's the Elliot Rogers one, if people
that was no, it wasn't San Bernardino. You're right. It's Santa Barbara. Yeah, you're right. They're around the same, so he was the white supremacist who was like an incel and was like,
and somebody tweeted something like, not all men do things like this. And somebody very correctly said, well, okay, but yes, all women live in fear of something like this happening to them. And it was interesting because post Me Too, which is a very different kind of hashtag activism around this, right? Like Me Too is about claiming that you, a visible woman with virtue and a media stand, have also experienced this thing. It's about using your credibility to make a stand about the issue. Yes, All Women, which didn't take off and stick, was universalizing, was about all people as a category experiencing something. And it's something that, because the Solnit piece was written before Me Too, it's something I like to talk about with my students because of how much didn't change because of either of these things, right? So sorry, that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I agree. It's really interesting.
Not to bring it back to Kill a Mockingbird, but there was some discussion earlier in the chat about like why it was like the play was good and blah blah, which it wasn't. It was a terrible piece of garbage, and I like Jeff Bridges, and like it was, I still thought it's really bad. But the reason that I didn't like it was specifically because if you actually revisit the story of To Kill a Mockingbird, it is the story of that centers around a white kind of defense attorney male defense attorney defending a Black man who is charged with rape of a white woman, and a white woman standing up and basically falsely crying rape on the stand, it becoming this entire, and this is like a total intersectionality moment. Like that, it was like, and they didn't address it at all. Like they did, it was like the play was coming out in the midst of both Black Lives Matters and Me Too, and here you have this insane dilemma that this presents. Of like, how are we supposed to like buy the fact that it's like the Me Too movement and believe all women, but then we're just watching a play in which a woman actively lies about her rape, and it like,
and this is we now know that was also the case in the murder of Emmett Till, that the woman lied about that assault and came out about that too. I believe Tim Tyson, but there's a number of histories where that is the case, where we have a misallegation for whatever reason. I mean, that's in Ida B. Wells's reportings on lynching and false accusation way back.
I like use the To Kill a Mockingbird example just because like it's actually less politically active than any of like, and because I don't know, but there's something that about it, the fiction of it, but like the fact that we're revisiting it with such like we're reliving it like without like the nuance, like while the real world events like Emmett Till happen, is like I guess what I'm kind of a little bit perplexed by.
Yeah, things that didn't need to be addressed in context when that book came out, of course, are needing to be addressed in context now. I mean, yeah.
We don't really know that these social movements haven't ameliorated the situation. That is, hopefully, people are scared of getting Me Too'd if they act in wrongful ways. And so therefore time will tell, will it not? I mean,
well, I think Me Too is mostly about workplace sexual harassment, and perhaps that's helping part of it. But I think that our analytic in the field guide and in this conversation is about the broad problem of gender violence and how that, so I think
right. So in terms of gender violence,
Gabby Petito, right? And I think that like
I'm sorry, do we know? I mean, I'm sure you know, I don't know. Do we know about the rates of domestic violence over the last, let's say, 30 years, whether they've fallen or not, or whether they've fallen faster than the fall in violent crime?
I believe that they have not fallen, she argues in this piece. And one of the interesting things about the Rebecca Solnit essay is that she has a frontispiece that's like, I have revised this essay X number of times around X number of violent events against women. But I'd have to let her answer specifically.
Oblio 23. The floor is 23 times yours.
You made me choke. I was just interested in your thoughts on the civil lawsuit against the Unite the Right people.
Yeah. So this is Science Kessler. This is the lawsuit in Charlottesville that started jury selection yesterday or 2 days ago. I'm losing track. In the Unite the Right rally in 2017. I'll be watching on tenterhooks. It strikes me that there are a ton of trials right now that are litigating various parts of this problem. The Kyle Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha started this week, jury selection, and the Arbery trial in Georgia also started jury selection all the same week, which is amazing that we're having all this happen at the same time. I will say in general, civil trials have been incredibly effective at dealing with white power organizing because they've provided opportunities to do things like stop people from associating, harm fundraising apparatuses. They've shut down newsletters. They've even done things like seize the group membership headquarters. While the criminal trials have typically had issues, is the short answer to a long answer. So I'm always watching to see all of these things, but I'm very interested to see what happens in Charlottesville. It's very important. And I think were it to fail, that would be that would bode very badly for, I think it would incite additional far-right activity.
Charles T., the floor is yours.
So I guess my question is, and this is a kind of a broad question, how have white supremacists reacted to January 6th? And how should January 6th be understood as a white supremacist incident, in the sense of it was a fairly broad swath of people who participated, some of whom were objectively not white, but was it, how is it best understood, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. I think January 6th is, oh shoot, I'm sorry. I have to run to another event in 2 minutes.
Finish this question and off you go.
And off I go.
I will take over in your name.
It represents the intersection of organized white power violence with QAnon activity that we don't understand as well yet, but that sort of rehashes conspiracy theories that we're all familiar with from earlier in the 20th century with the Trump base. But what we know is that the white power movement and militant right, the organized factions, immediately reached into those mainstream Trump supporter groups on social media to recruit. And we also know that a lot of people experienced powerful instant radicalization on that day through the shared experience of the attack. And we know, according to Robert Pape, my colleague at University of Chicago, he did a poll that found that 47 million people think that Biden is falsely elected and that Trump is the real president. And 21 million said that they would support the use of force to return Trump to office. So those are not fringe group numbers anymore. I think this is a mainstream issue.
Yeah.
Okay. And with that, I will run away. Thank you.
Kathleen, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Nice to see you. Bye.
So before we sign off, Joel the Nudge has a question that I think is actually better directed to Kate and Scott than to Kathleen anyway. It may be a kind of ideal Scott question. And so I thought, since Kathleen is gone, Joel, why don't you pose your question to Scott and Kate?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been in the news a lot and you hear a lot kind of bantied about is the critical race theory. And it seems like there's a lot of poor definitions out there. I was curious if you all had a good running definition that you like, and would you be willing to kind of share it so that, as we're thinking about these things, it's grounded in something that's reasonably well considered. Does that make sense?
Great. So this feels like a Scott kind of question, but
I mean, I could take a go at it, but I think that Scott probably has been in the academy longer and just has like a better understanding history of like critical legal studies and critical race theory.
So obviously it's lots of things that go under critical race theory are dissimilar from one another in many, many important ways. But what I think of and what I associate with like a kind of a core commitment or angle or perspective of critical race theory is that it tries to uncover kind of hidden racial ideologies underneath seemingly neutral categories.
Yes.
Okay, so
it's not different from like everything that Kathleen's talking about today.
Right, exactly. So you think that these things are neutral and are not discriminatory, but in fact, in application or in conception or understood within the social context or understood how it plays out in the market or however way you want to put it, it's in fact undergirding, it's grounded by and or perpetuates a racist system.
So I will just say the history of it being one that started in the 60s and 70s following the critical legal studies movement, which was kind of also, is it CLS also kind of legal realism, or those like jump
Slightly
slightly different?
CLS followed
Right. Legal realism.
There's a kind of like the CLS people. So Kate, of course, you're right. Not to jump in here, but it's exactly analogous. So the CLS people were like the Marxists who said, actually, capitalism that looks like formal justice. In fact, it's really furthering capitalism.
The market.
Right. It's also right. This whole thing about economic efficiency and all this stuff, or property rights. This is all furthering the owners of capital against labor. And so critical race theorists kind of pick that up and say, oh, well, whether in addition to or in lieu of it's also a very powerful force, even more powerful force, which is racial ideology.
The way that I teach this as an example, like that you wouldn't imagine it in like, say, a black letter law class like property, as I teach a case called Johnson v. McIntosh, which is from the early, like I think it's one of the first, it's like one of the very early cases of basically Native Americans had sold land to a group of people, like a group of settlers. The settler, like then that land had been claimed by the U.S. government. The people who had been on the land and said that they owned it, like claimed against the U.S. government, hey, you can't just like take our land. We've been here, developed it, all this stuff. And simultaneously, like basically the decision ended up being routed in the idea that like, well, you didn't discuss, like the people, you discovered the land, so you have rights to it, but they didn't have rights to sell it to you because they don't count as discoverers and they don't count as discovering. And the idea of discovering seems like a neutral time-based or like circumstance-based, but like really it's a meaningless concept that is really all about privileging certain types of expectations of like, can you put a flag in it? Can you shoot other people off your land with guns type of thing? Do you have these types of constructs of like exclusion that are going to make it seem like in a way that we now would associate with discovery or something? And so the idea of that being that like there are racial elements of dominance and colonialism built into that seem as if they are just like, oh, well, the court like kind of like puts them aside. It's just like, well, it was discovered when white people got there, even though other people were totally there beforehand. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, I think that's like a good example of like looking at something that is like a very tropish like kind of story that you hear and then kind of looking at it from a different perspective, that like that's what CRT tries to bring.
But the other thing that people in the current debate, such as it is about CRT, which is a very generous noun to use to describe what's going on about CRT, is that
yes,
CRT is one wing of a larger set of what are sometimes called the crits, the critical legal studies movements, which are multiple and which are not all of a same. So Richard Posner, the sort of one of the godfathers of the law and economics movement, describes law and economics as, broadly speaking, closely akin to the critical legal studies movement, in that it denies that the law, capital T, capital L, has a great deal of philosophical integrity of its own, and insists that there are kind of other forces that are actually, in the case of law and economics, sort of economic efficiency, that are actually guiding the direction. And so like the idea that you sort of take out of the critical legal studies world this one strain that asks questions about the role of race underlying the law is, I mean, look, CRT has its excesses like all legal studies movements do. It's a very silly thing to do, except that it's not silly at all, because it's not actually about CRT, and none of this discussion is actually about the merits of CRT. It's what it's actually about is asserting a certain cultural dominance over school boards by way of yelling about masks and about teaching kids anything that involves, a kind of inquisitorial attitude about American history vis-a-vis race.
Yeah.
And CRT is just the name that is being given to that project.
Just to follow up exactly on what you said, the word that critical is playing there is it's kind of playing the role of what they used to call the hermeneutics of suspicion. That is, that you don't take something at face value. What you
Scott,
really
you just
see
got the word hermeneutics into in lieu of fun, which I don't think
I've been waiting for this moment for 537 episodes.
537 episodes without the word hermeneutics ever appearing in this, and you have now
let him finish a sentence, Ben.
Okay. So, but basically what it is to be suspicious about like the institutions of society. So democracy and voting and the market and all these things are being reinterpreted as being something less wonderful than they claim to be. And so different critical schools think of it in different terms, but they all have in common the sense that there are kind of bad things underlying American institutions.
I just want to say that I had a conversation this summer that just like blew my mind with a very close relative that was just kind of like, I just don't understand why the left has to call these things critical race theory. Why do they have to say critical? Well, they just makes it sound so negative from the beginning. And I just was like,
blame Kant. Blame Immanuel Kant, it all comes from his, ban the Critique of Pure Reason. Man, have you ever read that thing? That is hard going.
I know, it's just got too many pages for me. And even when they're not in German, they still read like they're in German.
Right.
Well, we are going to replace the word critical in critical race theory with cheerful. And that should solve the entire problem. It's going to be cheerful race critical legal theory. And it's going to solve the whole problem. Fox News will be mollified. Kate's family will be like, oh, there's no problem then. It's we've gotten rid of the word critical. The solution is at hand. We will be back tomorrow. Who do we have tomorrow? I think
Jill.
We have Jill Filipovich. I'm excited about this because the other day, and so this is your homework, people. I watched an amazing documentary called Lula Rich. It's on Netflix, and it is the story of a multi-level marketing scheme run by two total sociopaths. And the guest commentator throughout the whole thing is one Jill Filipovich. Jill has studied LuLaRoe, the MLM in question. She has developed a very interesting set of thoughts about why this MLM was so effective at getting thousands, tens of thousands, like 100,000 stay-at-home moms around the country to go insane selling leggings. The story is completely deranged, and making billions of dollars for these sociopathic people who ran it. And she's developed a lot of interesting thoughts about it. And I thought we should just have Jill on to talk about LuLaRoe, multi-level marketing schemes in general, and why they have such appeal to vulnerable stay-at-home moms who are not necessarily feeling so great about themselves. I think it's like a really interesting subject, and I thought Jill's thoughts on it were really, really compelling. So I asked her to come on and have a LuLaRoe conversation. So that'll be tomorrow, 22 hours and 52 minutes from now. And until then, Scott?
Well, we can't have critical race theory anymore, but we can have wool shirts and cheerful race theory.
Cheerful
race theory.
It's the wave of the
Trademark. Trademark. Let's get it on. Let's get it out there, people.
Hashtag cheerful race theory. Yeah.
Hashtag cheerful race theory.
It's totally happening. See you guys.